see you on this experimental journey which we are going to have together. If I speak quite slowly like this, can most of you understand what I am saying?
Yes.
Good. That's good. As I mentioned, this is indeed an experiment. It's an experiment with a new kind of book, which you will see. I read through the book and then there is a film, and then I can show the film as part of the book. This is a new invention of a multimedia book, which you are the first people to see. And it is also an experiment because it is very difficult to talk about anthropological fieldwork. Your own experiences are important to you, but not interesting to anyone else. And it is very difficult to convey the feelings and experience of fieldwork. So I am trying to see if this will work with you. With my own Cambridge students, I sometimes have a day with them like this, where we watch films. So this is a continuation of what I have experimented with in Cambridge, but doing it in a different way. So if you feel that it is not what you hope to hear or are not interested in, you don't need to come tomorrow or the next day. In fact, we were expecting only to talk to 20 or so students, so it's very nice to see more of you, but you don't need to come if this is not what you wanted. How many of you have read or studied any anthropology before now? Do any of you know anything about anthropology? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, what subjects are most of you doing? How many of you are doing history? 1, 2, 3, 4. English studies. What other subjects are you doing? What?
American culture.
American culture. There's a contradiction in found. Right. Anything else? Sociology. Yeah.
Cultural heritage and tourism development.
What are you doing?
Cultural heritage and
Cultural
tourism
heritage.
development.
Okay. Well, we'll see. I haven't time to explain in detail what anthropology is about. But basically, anthropology is the study of humankind. And anthropologists are interested in cultural variation, the difference between societies and the similarity of societies. And you're trying to find out if there are any general patterns in human societies. So, in order to do this, you have to try and understand another culture. Now, for my wife and I to come here, we need to try to begin to understand Chinese civilization and culture. If you were anthropologists, you would go to another society, India, America, wherever, and try to understand that culture. Now, this is not at all easy. In fact, it is very, very difficult. So anthropologists have developed a method to do this, which is called fieldwork. And fieldwork methods in anthropology have been used now in quite a few other disciplines. For example, in studying animals or in studying in sociology. But they were developed particularly in anthropology, and only about 100 years ago, the first famous field worker who my students think invented the method, there were some people before, in fact, was a man called Malinowski, and he went to the Trobriand Islands 100 years ago, 1914. So anthropology and fieldwork methods are 100 years old. But how can I explain to you, sitting in this classroom in Chengdu, what it is like? If I say to you, well, you go to another culture, you learn the language, you live with the people, you write down your notes, and then you come back and you write a book. That's it. End of lecture. So, how can I explain in more detail this very personal and emotional experience, which consists really of three parts? Anthropologists have a theory that in important parts of our lives, like at death, when we die, or when we marry, we go through what is called a rite of passage, that's R-I-T-E, where you change from one position to another when you die, when you marry, or when you graduate from university or whatever. This consists of three stages. You are at the beginning in this stage. You then go out of space and time into another world, and then you come back into this world. But when you come back into this world, you are changed. This is the kind of idea that lies behind many stories, particularly science fiction stories and children's stories. For example, Harry Potter. Harry Potter lives in an ordinary house, just leading an ordinary life. Then he goes to platform 9 3/4, goes through a wall, and he is in another world, the world of Hogwarts. And then he has his adventures, and then he comes back into his ordinary life. Now that is similar to what I will describe to you now, which is the movement from where we are now into another world and bring back to here. So what I hope to do with you and share with you, and it will be very interesting to see what you think, whether you think it works, is through a lot of use of film to journey with you from this lecture room all the way to the high Himalayas in central Nepal, spend 3 mornings with you in a village in the Himalayas, and then bring you back here. So your minds and hearts, I hope, will travel while your bodies stay here. So we are going to engage in a virtual reality journey together. So I need to start this projector again. There we are. The place we are going to, here is India, here is Nepal, China is over here, of course. This is where I was born, just here. And this is Burma, Myanmar. This is Tibet here. Within Nepal, we are going to journey from the UK to Kathmandu, which is the capital of Nepal, spend a day there, go to Pokhara, spend a day there, and then go up to the village of Tak in the mountains of central Nepal. That is the journey we will take. This is just in passing, this is all our visits to this village which we're going to go to together. As you see, we have been many times. So, the first thing that an anthropologist does before they go to do their anthropological fieldwork is to prepare their minds. If you are a historian or anyone going to do research, you spend some months before you go reading about the background of the discipline you're concerned with. And this is just a small sample. When I was at Oxford, before I started doing my fieldwork, I went to lectures in anthropology. And these are a few of the lectures I went to in a series in Oxford before we set out. You also prepare, you read books, take notes on books, and work out some questions and problems you would like to look at when you go to the field. And these are some notes that my first wife, Jill, wrote. Questions arising out of the Newark, which is a famous anthropological book by Evans Pritchard. So these were questions we went out with when we went to our fieldwork. So the first question is, you might be interested in, and some people ask me, is why did I do fieldwork at all? Well, there are a number of reasons. One was that I had been trained as a historian, and I had written a doctorate, a D.Phil, on 17th century England. But I had always felt, while I was studying history, that I would really never understand a pre-industrial society unless I lived in it. How can we now, in the present 21st century, take our minds and hearts back into a world where there was no electricity, there were no cars, there were no mobile phones, where people live in situations of great sickness, hunger, hard work. That is how most people lived until 200 years ago. And yet, if you're just a historian looking at documents, it's very difficult to imagine what it would be like to live in such a world. And I thought it would be a very good idea to actually go and spend a year living in such a world. More specifically, there were other reasons. One was, in order to be an anthropologist, to be a teacher in anthropology, you had to do a PhD, and you had to do that by doing field work. Another reason was that I didn't really know whether anthropology was possible or not. To try and get inside the minds and the hearts of entirely different people seems almost impossible. How can you begin to understand their worlds? So I wanted to see whether it was possible. Another reason was that I've always wanted to help people in other parts of the world. I had a very privileged life and upbringing, went to very good schools, had plenty of food and good medicine. But what about most people? They don't live like that. And I'd always wanted to go and try and do something useful in what we used to call a third world society, and a poorer society. I gradually learned that I wouldn't be a doctor and wouldn't be able to help in that way. But the way I might be able to help was to increase the understanding of the problems of such societies. And finally, there was another reason. In the 1960s, when I was preparing to do field work, the great problem that people talked about is the same problem as the one today, which is the problems of ecology, that is global warming and the destruction of the planet, and of population decrease. There were books being written called The Population Bomb, for instance, which described how the population of the world was shooting up and we would soon suffer from starvation and not be able to feed people enough. So I was very interested in that, and that led to partly to the choice of the place where I wanted to work. People say, well, why did you go to this village? And there were several reasons. One was that I was born, as I mentioned, just on the edge of China, Burma, and India, in Assam. I wanted to go back there to where I had been brought up as a little boy. But I couldn't actually, I wasn't able to go to that particular part of India because there was a rebel movement. The Nagas people who were there were declaring independence, so I couldn't go. So my supervisor was an expert also on the peoples of Nepal. He was the first anthropologist to go to Nepal from the West in 1953. He said, why don't you go up to the village of Tak, or at least to Siklis, which is a big village above. So I said, okay, that sounds fine, and got him to point out where it was on a map, and prepared to go to Nepal. I realized that this was a very good place to study because these are very, very steep mountains, as you'll see, and there has been a great deal of deforestation. They have been cutting down the woods, and this means that the water comes rushing down the hillside, causing all sorts of problems. So, for a place where you could study the pressure of population on resources, which was my interest, this was perfect. So I did what I mentioned, which is I started to prepare by reading books and articles about the area before I went, other groups who lived nearby, and everything I could read about the area. And then, very briefly, I trained in fieldwork methods. In fact, there was hardly any training in fieldwork methods. And this continued, in fact, even in our department in social anthropology for many years. You really can't train people to do fieldwork. There are a number of books which say how to do fieldwork, but they are usually rather dry and not very helpful. And when I came to teach people how to do fieldwork, I found it was almost impossible because they were all doing very different things. By the 1980s, by your time certainly, Some would go to cities, some would go to the countryside, some would go to this country, some would go to that country. Some would study medical anthropology, others economic anthropology. There was nothing in common. So what can you say to people to describe or inform them, give them some useful background which they could all use? And what I realized gradually was that although you cannot say, well, you should do this, you should do that, you could talk about your own experience, and then, since all fieldwork has certain features in common, the leaving here, the living there, the gathering of information, and then the bringing back and writing, my experience would have an overlap with anything anyone did. The case you see here is a very remote village community in the Himalayas. But if I came to Chengdu to do fieldwork, I would do many of the same things. I would find an area of Chengdu and treat it as a village, and then I would do the filming, the collecting of materials about people's family life and so on. The same as here. So what I'm going to describe to you is not what you would ever do as a field anthropologist, but it will give you a feeling for the sorts of problems there are and the sorts of methods which someone has used, I myself. You may wonder how much was already in my head as a plan of what I would do and what I would gather before I went. In science, the scientific subjects, you have hypotheses, you have theories about what you will find. You then do the experiments, and then you confirm or refute your hypotheses. And many people see anthropology and sociology in a similar way. You have some ideas to test, you go and do your experiment, in this case in fieldwork, and then you come back and you write your results saying, I found this but I didn't find that. In fact, it's very difficult to do that in anthropology. My students do write proposals saying, when I go to Morocco or Indonesia or China, I would like to look at this. And I did write a proposal about what I was going to do. But, in fact, you do many other things. Many of the things you hadn't thought of come up. And many of the things you thought might be interesting when you're sitting in your library, in your university before you go, it's impossible to study, or they're not interesting. So, on the whole, anthropologists in the past, the great ones, have just gone out with general curiosity. And then they will find things that interest the people themselves and which they find interesting. So I did have a few ideas, but this is the project proposal which I wrote for the people who were paying for my fieldwork foundation. This is a fieldwork project, approach and problems, to undertake the conventional village study of one village, following the model of previous studies, showing the interlinking of ecology, social structure and mental structure, divided into chapters on physical background, domestic cycle and kinship systems, economic organisation, political organisation, ritual and beliefs. This would have the aim of doing this and that and so on. To take as the central problem that of attitudes to and effects of demographic, that's population change. The sort of problems would be what factors, for example, kinship structure, ideals of virility, etc., affect the levels of the numbers of births in the society. So this laid out And then the aim of this would be to test hypotheses, various hypotheses. These were the models, some model studies which I drew attention to. So, and at the time I wrote an article for a well-known English journal about the problems of population and anthropology. Anyway, after a few weeks or months, you start to go prepare, and then you leave. And I now want to start on the journey. Before you leave home, of course, everything has changed hugely. I'm now talking mainly about my first field work, which was in 1968. So that's 55 years ago. And the world has changed hugely since then. At that time, it was very difficult, once you had gone out of Europe, once you had gone to India or Nepal, to find anything to buy. Even in China, when we first came in 1996, which isn't very long ago, 18 years ago, the shops had very few things in them. In Beijing, it was almost impossible to buy wine, a bottle of wine. I remember seeing a bottle of wine, Jacob's Creek wine from Australia, and being very excited. There was hardly any wine in Beijing 18 years ago. So you can imagine what a small city in India or Nepal, there was nothing. So the first thing you had to do was to prepare and gather together all the things you thought you might need. And this is let's see if we can make it a little bit bigger. This is a list of the things I bought on that first field work before going out. As you see, there are things like medicines, £8, stationery, that's writing things, £3, toothpaste and shampoo, water purifying tablets, shirts, a book on gardening, seeds, I was hoping to grow plants, a suitcase, thermometer, a guitar, strings for my guitar, and we'll see that later. So basically, this was what we were going to take out when we went. What happened then, and still happens, although with you won't notice it so much, is that when you go to another culture, you go through a series of stages where you leave your own and you arrive at another. The moment, for most of you, all that will consist of is you go to America or you go to Europe. You'll go to the airport, you'll go out of China into the departure lounge, out of space and time, you go up into the aeroplane, you go along, down into the departure lounge or arrival lounge in America, and then out into America. And it all happens very, very quickly. The early anthropologists, Malinowski and others 100 years ago, it took them months. Malinowski going to the Pacific Islands, the Falkland Islands. It took him 2 or 3 months in a boat. Even in my time, although there were aeroplanes, there was a series of stages where I left my own culture and arrived in their culture. The first stage was leaving my house, arriving at the airport. Then the flying across quite an old aeroplane and arriving in Kathmandu. So that was the first arrival. Then leaving Kathmandu and going to a small town, Pokhara. And then leaving that small town and going up to the village. So there were these various stages, and at each stage, things changed. The food changed, the smell changed, the sense of time changed. Things got slower, more peaceful. At the beginning it was quite busy, and then by the time you were walking up to the village, no cars, nothing. And everything slowed down. In order to go up to the village, at that time, you needed a special trekking pass, trekking visa. This is my trekking visa for my first trip. As you say, I could go to Pokhara and Sikris, which was a big village. When we left Pokhara, we had to just make sure we only took what we absolutely needed, but we realized that once we were in the village, we wouldn't be able to buy anything at all. So this is what I carried on my first field work into the village. In one knapsack, one rucksack, there were stationery, wardrobes to hang things in, plastic bowls, socks, handkerchiefs, and so on. And then in another one, other things. Some food, concentrated food, toilet paper, drawing crayons, pencils, and so on. So this is what we carried up into the field. And this is a list of everything we took, an inventory of goods brought to town. So this lists everything that we took up there. We arrived on the 23rd of December 1968, and this is the day after we arrived. I wrote a letter to my parents describing the arrival, and this is the first letter home, and I'll just read just the beginning of it. It's difficult to select out of the many impressions received in the first few hours in a Gurung village. The people we were working with were called Gurungs. They are famous as soldiers in the British Gurkhas, and they are people who came down from northern China through Sichuan, across Tibet, into Nepal, where they now live. So we were in a Gurung village. There are the ubiquitous, that means everywhere, hens, goats, buffaloes, crowing and clucking, a constant background to village life. There are the houses, some tiled with slates, some with thatch, some with mud walls, others with stone walls, like a Dales, that's an English part of England, houses. There is the village well, a pipe where water gushes into the numerous receptacles, where people wash their feet, hair, animals, children, and away from which an open drain runs. There are the children, masses of them, with running noses, ticks in their hair, ragged clothes, yet full of intelligence, charm, and beauty, smiling inquisitively at us through their gap teeth, and going into hysterical laughter when we try out our few words of good on them. So this is the first impressions, and I always tell my students, write as much as you can in the first 2 weeks. That is when you get the maximum what's called culture shock. Everything is new, fresh, surprising. Later on it will become normal, but at the beginning it is strange, and you should write as much of your impressions as possible then, as later you won't be able to see these things. So that's the first arrival. What I now want to do is to go with you on this journey in film. The film actually was taken not on that first field work, but in 1993, many years later, with Sarah. But the village was still the old village, mainly of Gurungs at that time. So we'll start in our house in Cambridge. And here you can see in our bedroom, we've put everything we're going to try and take on this table or on the floor nearby. For instance, there's a tape recorder here. And here is a very big battery. At that time, it was very difficult. A battery this big, very heavy, would last you for about 2 hours. Now everything is so simple and the batteries are very small. Here are our films. And so here I will show you going from our house to the airport. Our rucksacks. Outside our house, going to catch the taxi. This is our village in England, just outside our house. Putting things into the bus, which will take us to the airport. Gatwick Airport. This is Cambridge still. Waiting for a bus. On the bus, I don't know why we're waiting after it's been packed, but still, this is a famous bus station in Cambridge, Drummond Street. This is a moment when you realise you've forgotten your passport or your money or something vital. Going down the motorway to Gatwick. Out of space and time in England into the airport, which is a marginal, liminal, as anthropologists call it, area. It's outside normal society. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm showing you a new experiment. As you see, this is a book. I've got the text here. When I click on these images, I can show them as films. I can show them either in the form you saw, or as a floating video. I'll show you in the next one. So we've now gone into the airport and left. And we've been flying for 8 or 9 hours, and we're just flying over North India, with the Himalayas over in the distance here. And we're going to land in Kathmandu, which is then still quite a small city. It's 2 or 3 times as big now, 20 years later.
International Airport
दिनुहुन र चिजको पेटी बाँधिदिनु र अनुरोध गर्दछौँ। धन्यवाद। May I have attention please? We shall be landing at Gurungs International Airport in Kathmandu in a few minutes. Kindly extinguish your cigarette, fasten your seatbelt, and put your seat back in an upright position. Thank you.
gives you a sense of now you're in another world, you're in Kathmandu. Then usually you stay in the main city or town for a few days, gathering a few more bits of equipment, meeting people, getting used to a different rhythm of life. And everything at first is a total shock. This is Kathmandu in 1993. Very different from the world you experience now. And so we will now drive from the airport through the bit of the city to the hotel where we stay. And last you saw that I showed it to you. I'll do it now. Very dusty, full of traffic and people and animals. And then finally we arrive at our hotel. So we're now in a hotel, quite a luxurious hotel in Kathmandu, meeting friends from previous visits, collecting bits and pieces. You then have to go on from this capital of Nepal to a small village, and again time changes, attitudes change, you begin to use your Western bits of your Western sense of your identity. So this is the flight across from Kathmandu to Pokhara. As you see, this is the baggage area. It's fairly old-fashioned. Already time is beginning to slow down. There is a lot of waiting, slowing down from the rush of Western life. Not too many by a local airline. Again, flights on this day. Not many flights. This local flight across to Pokhara takes about 40 minutes, whereas if you go by bus or car, it takes a whole day. Small planes which will fly across, showing the vast expanse of the Himalayas on the right.
in the 1950s was on an aeroplane. It's about 2,000 feet, a beautiful new town, still with much charm. An intersection of the east and the west, where the Guru
So we've now arrived in the local town of Pokhara, and we'll drive up through Pokhara, and I think I'll leave that ocean out. We usually spend a few days there because we have been adopted into a Gurung family, and usually when we arrive they meet us and then we spend 2 or 3 days with them. This little film, it shows you an extract meeting up with our family in the 1990s. There was a party going on. So this is my sister, adopted sister, and as you'll see, we're going to join in the party.
been 16, 17 times. We have family and friends, and here I'm dancing with my younger sister at a housewarming party. We go through a layer of relatives and friends and catch up on news and gossip and enjoy ourselves for 2 or 3 days before we go on up to the village. There we meet my younger sister, and on the right my sister-in-law, my adopted father, Lieutenant Bowen Singh Gurung, his younger relatives playing in this courtyard, including Prem Kumari at the back on the right, the girl who will feature a lot in this film. She is my sister, Dilmaya's daughter, adopted sister. So we check the local census. We're doing a study of the town Gurungs as well as the village Gurungs. And life carries on smoothly with Prem Kumari combing relatives' hair. And then after a few days,
so this is the whole of the family, our relatives and our close relatives. So we've now spent a few days there, and we're going to now set off to go up to the village where we'll spend the next weeks and months, and in your company a few hours. You'll have to you can do the first bit of the journey nowadays in a jeep or a car. Recently there's been a road built in the last few years, but at this time we went up to the top of the valley and then you had to walk. So this is the walk up to the village by 2,000 or 3,000 feet. my aunt, who was quite old, in her 80s. She's going to walk up with us. This is my father-in-law. That's where we come into approach over there. This is the last car we'll see for some time. Carry huge weights on their backs, as you see. I used to walk down this when on my first field work, carrying these quite large rucksacks like that, of food and things. And I'd walk down for 6 hours and then do shopping and collect letters and then walk back up to the village that evening. And I was young and strong. Couldn't do it now. But this is taking you out of civilization, you know, with cars and telephones and electricity, into a world about 1,000 years old. Every footstep you take along here is a year at a time. A few months anyway. Stop on the way for cuppies and cold tea. See the people's faces are along the road. Mixture of Chinese, Tibetan, with a little bit of Indian mixture as well. We'll move on up to another tea house, and we'll have a rest after pleasure. 3/4 of an hour's walking. And cups of tea made with milk and sugar, all mixed together. Walking along the side of the river. Quite windy here. We're building a bridge. This is a beautiful part of the walk, just alongside the river with butterflies and flowers. Very cool and lovely. We no longer do this. You will never walk this because there's a road up above and you will never go along this track. I've done it about 40 or 50 times, I suppose, this walk. After you've walked another hour or so, you stop at a resting place And here we found someone who's got a bad headache, so we're bringing her some medicine. And continuing walking up and up and up. Another 1,000 feet or so up this path here. For some reason the Gurungs always built their villages on the top of ridges, not down in the valleys where the good riceland was. There's been much discussion about why they should do that. In fact, as we'll see later, it makes sense because on the top of the ridge you're halfway between the forests where you get your wood and your leaves for your buffaloes, halfway, and then down below are the rice fields. If you lived down in the bottom you could never really get up to the forest. Also the Gurungs came from much higher up, so they were coming down and down and down and down, and they liked living high up. See, one step at a time, but with this old lady in her 80s walking strongly along, we had to try and do our best. Another rest for an orange. That's looking out down the valley. That's where we've come from. That's where the jeep got off the jeep. We're now up on the first ridge, going through a small village. See, they are quite good houses. I'll talk about that later. These people are, by Nepalese standards, quite rich because in the past many of their sons went to the army, into the British Army or the Indian Army, and sent back money, so they built quite good houses. We're now looking at his fields down here, the water field, opened by a field down here. These are the rice fields down below the bottom of the village. There's a river here. This is where we water the field for. So a poor family didn't have the rice fields. And this is the slope on which they're doing their agriculture. The village is up here, around here. This is the village here. The school up above. And we're on the first ridge. You can see we've still got quite a bit of climbing to do. Another 2,000 feet or so from here. We meet friends as we walk up and they say hello. And where have you been for the last year and so on. And put things in our hair and our ears. Come again and again, she says. So we're just catching up on news, chatting. This is the last tea house before we make the final walk up to the village. It has quite a lot of biscuits and sweets and things like that. And now we're just about to walk up the last bit, which is very steep. When I first went there weren't these steps at all. You had to go up on your hands and knees, more or less, to get up this last bit. Now they've built a proper track. Still hard work. We were amazed to think that they planned to build a road up here for cars, which they have in fact done. about 5 years ago. So now you never go up these steps. Hardly anyone uses these steps anymore. The only way to get things around in this part of the world was on your back. It was too steep for anything with wheels. And they didn't really use animals to carry much. Yeah, it was too expensive. Cheaper to put it on your back. Now you can see where we've come from. Right over there. That's where the jeep was. And the last bit of the climb up to the village now. This is where we've come along this ridge. And we've now arrived on the edge of the village. This is the edge of the village path. So the last part of the arrival is arriving and greeting our family in the village. This is one of the two main paths through the village.
Hey, someone one.
How are you in the local language?
Namaste.
The village well spring. That's our house. We'll see more of.
Murli.
This is my
Namaste. Nani.
relatives down here and my sister here. First we're saying hello to one of the neighbours.
Ah, namaste.
My nephew. My sister. And Kumari, my niece, my sister's daughter. So this is the village band. They have a part of a caste system here. These are tailors, people who make clothes, and they are the village musicians. They've come to welcome us. They've usually drunk something and have a bit of a dance as well. Many of the people in the village come down to watch the dancing and to welcome us back. So we've arrived in the village, and I'll just introduce you now to the village quickly, and then we'll have a little rest for all of us, and then start to see what it is like to live in a village like this. So this village is called Tak here, and this is the shape of the village lands. The river is down here. This is very steep here. There's other villages to the north, and you come from Phukra down here. It's a village of a couple of thousand people or so. If you look at the agriculture of the village, down here you have rice lands, then maize lands, then grazing, and then the forest up here. If you look at it in terms of the gradient of the village, this is the steepest mountain in England, Scafell Pike. And we think this is very, very steep. To climb up here is a big effort for English people. And yet, if you look at the cross-section of Tark village, here's the river, here's the village, and here is the forest. And you see it is much steeper here, and also much higher here than anything in England. So these people are doing agriculture on the side of a very steep mountain. Extremely difficult. There are many parts, of course, of Sichuan, Yunnan and so on, where they do similar agriculture on steep mountain sides. But this is how it is. These are the various houses. We're staying in a house down here. It's down here. But what I want to show you, this is from my early field work. There's the Himalaya Mountains behind. You can see Annapurna 4. Views of the mountains. This is just a tour one. This is the village here. You can see the steepness down to some fields below. This is looking up from below the village up to the village here. Looking down from the village, these are maize fields, and then down here rice fields. The field we showed you before, I showed you before, which we brought to our families over there. And another view down, looking down through, this is the rich rice land down here. And they have to carry all the stuff, all the rice that they grow from here right up on their back to the village. And this is looking sideways at the maize terraces. Looking down from the forest, it's a very good forest, it's a famous forest they have. Looking down on the top of the village, the houses from above, and closer from above, the main village path. Along the platforms in the village, people at work. The main street. A rich house, just above ours. Our family's house, Midland Poor House. And a very poor person's house, the tailor's house. And finally, I'll end with, this is just taking the camera and walking around, mainly looking at around the village, the mountains and so on, so you get a feel for the village. This is the mountains in the morning. That's Annapurna 4 mountain. There's much less snow. Each year there's less snow because of global warming. This is some villages to the north, Cyclus and other villages. That's Anchapucheri Mountain, Fishtail Mountain. One mountain. Village parks. Fields. Maize just grown outside the village. Mountain. Walking up into the forest. Seems to be a lot of mountains here. Looking down onto the rice fields. Rice fields and the river. Forest again, inside the forest. Where they get their wood and also the leaves to feed the buffaloes. Flowers, rhododendrons. Looking up at the village from the end of the village. The house we went to is down here. Again the village. Stone roofs, as you can see, slates. Though now it's mainly, a lot of them have corrugated iron. Some of them still have thatch instead. Probably about 50 houses in this area here, which is where I spent my first year of fieldwork, so I've visited many times since. So we've now reached the village, and in the next section I'm going to tell you about and discuss living